My daughter passed away 3 years ago. Every month since then, I've sent her husband $1,200. I told myself it was for my granddaughter. I told myself that's what my daughter would have wanted. I was wrong about a lot of things back then. My name is Howard. I'm 68 years old. I live in a 2-bedroom bungalow in Sudbury, Ontario, the same house my wife Patricia and I bought in 1989 when the nickel mines were still hiring and the future felt wide open. Patricia died 11 months after our daughter Claire. Breast cancer, same as her mother before her. The doctor said stress doesn't cause cancer, but I'm not sure I believe that. I think grief can hollow a person out until there's nothing left to fight with. Claire was 34 when she died. Ovarian cancer, found too late, gone in 8 months. She left behind a husband named Brendan and a little girl named Lily, who was 6 at the time, and had Claire's eyes exactly. That particular shade of green that changes color in different light. After the funeral, after Patricia got sick, after everything happened at once the way grief tends to pile on, I made a decision. Brendan worked at a building supply warehouse in Barrie. It wasn't bad work, but it wasn't great money either, and I knew he was stretched thin. So I called him one Sunday afternoon in January and I told him I wanted to help. "I don't need charity, Howard," he said. "It's not charity," I told him. "It's for Lily. For her school things, her hockey registration, whatever she needs. Claire would want that." He went quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Okay, thank you. $1,200 a month. I set it up as an e-transfer, automatic, 15th of every month. I'm retired now. I put in 31 years at the Hydro 1 substation outside of Chelmsford. Good pension. Nothing extravagant, but enough. $1,200 a month was about a third of what I took home. I didn't tell anyone because I didn't want it to feel like a transaction. I just wanted Lily to have what she needed. For the first year, things seemed fine. Brendan would text me a photo of Lily every few weeks. Her first hockey game. Her school concert. Her birthday with a cake shaped like a horse, because she loved horses the way Claire had loved horses at that age. I kept every photo. I printed some of them out and put them in frames on the mantel next to the one of Claire at her grad. Then the photos slowed down. Then they stopped. I called Brendan in February of the second year and he picked up but sounded distracted, like I'd interrupted something. I asked how Lily was doing in school. He said fine. I asked if she was still playing hockey. He said she'd quit. Too expensive, he said, which I found strange since I was sending money specifically for those kinds of things. I didn't push it. I figured maybe he was having a rough patch. Grief does that. It doesn't arrive on a schedule. But something sat wrong with me after that call. I couldn't name it exactly. Just a feeling, the kind you get after 30 years of working with electrical systems. A faint hum that tells you something's off before you can see it. It was my neighbor Vic who finally said something out loud. Vic Moreau is 71, a retired plumber, lives 2 houses down. His wife Lorraine and Patricia used to trade garden cuttings every spring. After Patricia died, Vic started coming over on Wednesday evenings to watch the hockey game and eat whatever I'd put together. He's one of those men who doesn't talk much but watches everything. One Wednesday in March, he arrived a few minutes early and found me at the kitchen table transferring the monthly $1,200 to Brendan's account. He asked what I was doing. I told him. He sat down, watched me finish. Didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, "Howard, do you actually know what that money's being used for?" I said I trusted it was going to Lily. He nodded slowly. Said my cousin's ex-wife did something similar to her in-laws. Took money for years. They never saw a cent of it go to the kids. I told him that was different, that Brendan wasn't like that. Fitch didn't argue. He just said, maybe. But when did you last actually see Lily? I sat with that question for a long time after he left. The answer was 14 months. It had been 14 months since I'd driven down to Barrie to take Lily for lunch. She'd been 7 then. Quiet, a little withdrawn. I'd assumed it was still the grief. She'd lost her mother young, and that kind of loss doesn't resolve quickly. But 14 months. I hadn't seen my granddaughter in over a year, and I'd been sending her father $1,200 every single month. I called the following weekend and asked if I could come down to see Lily. Brendan said that weekend wasn't good. I asked about the next. He said he'd have to check. He never called back. I drove down anyway. I want to be clear that I didn't go looking for trouble. I went because I missed my granddaughter and because something in me had shifted after Vic's question. Not suspicion exactly, more like clarity. The kind that arrives when you finally stop explaining away the things that don't add up. I parked on the street outside the townhouse Brendan rented in Barry's South End. It was a Thursday afternoon. I figured I'd knock, say I was in the area, take Lily for an ice cream if she was home from school. Simple enough. There was a car in the driveway I didn't recognize. A dark green Jeep with Quebec plates. I knocked. No answer for a long moment. Then Brendan opened the door looking flustered, wearing a t-shirt I didn't recognize, hair not quite right. He stared at me like I was a problem he hadn't anticipated. "Howard, I didn't know you were coming." "I should have called," I said. "Is Lily home?" Something crossed his face. "She's at my sister's for the week." I nodded. Asked if I could come in for a minute. He hesitated just a beat too long before stepping back. The living room was different than I remembered. New furniture. A large sectional sofa that looked expensive. A television mounted on the wall that was easily 70 inches. There were 2 wine glasses on the coffee table. One of them had lipstick on the rim. I didn't say anything. I sat down. We made conversation that felt like 2 people pretending nothing is happening, which I suppose it was. I left 20 minutes later and drove back to Sudbury and sat in my kitchen until almost midnight. Dick came over the next Wednesday. I told him what I'd seen. He listened, then said, "Before you do anything, you need to know for certain." He had a point. I didn't want to be the kind of man who makes accusations based on lipstick on a glass and new furniture. I'd worked with enough faulty data over the years to know that evidence needs to be verified before you act on it. I hired a private investigator, a woman in Barrie named Carolyn, mid-40s, matter-of-fact recommended by a colleague of my nephew's. She charged $90 an hour and told me she'd have something within 2 weeks. She had something within 9 days. The report was 12 pages. I read it 3 times on my kitchen table with a cup of tea that went cold. Brendan had been in a relationship for at least 18 months with a woman named Simone, who worked in pharmaceutical sales and traveled regularly between Barrie and Montreal, which explained the Quebec plates. Simone had been staying at the townhouse 4 to 5 days a week for the past several months. She had a key. Lily was not staying at Brendan's sister's house. Lily was enrolled in school 3 blocks from the townhouse and was being looked after, on the days Brendan worked, by a daycare she'd attended since she was 2. The sister visit had been, as far as Carolyn could tell, a story. The new furniture had been purchased 8 months ago from a shop in Barrie. The 70-inch television was from a Boxing Day sale. Carolyn had also, through public records, found that Brendan's car, a 3-year-old F-150 that replaced the older Civic he'd driven when Claire was alive, had been purchased 14 months ago. Around the same time the photos of Lily had stopped. The money I'd been sending to support my granddaughter had, by every indication, been funding a different life entirely. I need to tell you that my first feeling was not anger. It was something quieter and heavier. I thought about Claire, about how hard she'd worked to build something good with this man, how she'd trusted him, how she believed he was steady. I thought about how she'd asked me in those last weeks to look after Lily, how I promised her I would, how I thought I'd been keeping that promise. I felt like I'd failed her twice. But then I thought about Lily, about those green eyes, about the fact that my granddaughter was growing up 3 hours away and I hadn't seen her in over a year, and the man responsible for her well-being was using money meant for her to take a woman I'd never heard of out to restaurants and buy large televisions. That's when the anger arrived, and it arrived completely. I didn't call Brendan. I didn't confront him. I'd made that mistake before in my working life. Show your hand too early, and the problem disappears underground. Instead, I called my lawyer, a man named Arthur in Sudbury, who'd handled Patricia's estate, and who I trusted completely. I told him everything and put the investigator's report on his desk the following Monday. Arthur said, "Before we discuss the money, Howard, let's talk about Lily. Do you have any concerns about her actual welfare?" I thought about it seriously. Carolyn's report hadn't suggested neglect. Lily was attending school. She was in the daycare system. She appeared healthy in the photos Carolyn had taken from a distance. The harm being done was to me, financially, and perhaps to Lily in some larger sense, being used as justification for money that wasn't reaching her. She seems physically okay, I said, but I haven't seen her in over a year. That's not okay either. No, Arthur said, it isn't. We made a plan. It was methodical and it was careful, and I want to describe it exactly as it happened. First, I did not stop the transfers. Arthur's advice: don't alert him that something's changed. Keep everything exactly as it is while we prepare. Second, Arthur contacted a family lawyer in Barrie about grandparents' rights. In Ontario, under the Children's Law Reform Act, a grandparent can apply for access to a grandchild if that access is being unreasonably denied. I had documented attempts to visit, the calls, the drive to Barrie, the deflection. Carolyn's report added context. Third, and this was the part that required patience, we waited 3 more weeks. During that time, I texted Brendan twice, casually, asking about Lily. He responded vaguely both times. He didn't offer a visit. He didn't send photos. He didn't ask me anything about my life. He just kept receiving $1,200 on the 15th of every month and offering nothing in return. On the last Saturday of April, I drove back down to Barrie, not to the townhouse, to a park near Lily's school where Carolyn had told me Lily sometimes spent Saturday mornings when Brendan brought her to the playground. She was there. She was 8.5 now, taller than I'd imagined, wearing a red jacket. She was on the swings, pumping her legs hard, concentrating. She had Claire's intensity when she focused on something. Claire used to do everything like it mattered. I sat on a bench and watched for a few minutes. Then Lily looked over and stopped swinging and stared at me, and I saw the moment she recognized me. She ran across the wood chips, and I stood up and she hugged me around the middle the way small children do, with her whole body, and she said, "Grandpa, I didn't know you were coming." "I should have come sooner," I told her. "I'm sorry about that." Brendan was standing by the parking lot. He'd seen me by then. I watched him calculate something across that distance. He'd been caught off guard, no script prepared. Lily already in my arms. He walked over slowly. "Howard," he said, "what are you doing here?" Seeing my granddaughter, I said, "I've missed her." The 3 of us stood there for a moment. Lily looked between us. "Can Grandpa take me for hot chocolate?" she asked Brendan. He couldn't say no. Not right there, not with her looking up at him. He said, "Fine. 1 hour." I took her to a Tim Hortons nearby and we sat in a booth, and she told me about school and about a book she was reading about wolves and about how she wanted a dog, but her dad said no. She drank her hot chocolate with both hands around the cup, the way she'd done since she was small enough to need the grip. An hour passed like nothing. When I brought her back, Brendan was waiting outside the townhouse. As Lily ran inside, he turned to me and said, "You should have called first." "I did call," I said, "several times. You said you'd check your schedule and then didn't call back." Something shifted in his face. He'd thought I was the kind of man who would eventually just go away. "I'd been busy," he said. "I know," I said. Then I got in my car and drove home. 3 days later, Arthur filed the application for grandparent access. Brendan was served the following week. I also, as of that same date, stopped the e-transfers. Not with a message. Not with a confrontation. Just stopped. His first text came 4 days after the missed transfer, just checking if something happened with the payment, Howard. I didn't respond. His second text, 2 days later, the 15th, came and went. "Is everything okay?" Arthur advised me not to respond to anything financial related, so I didn't. His third message was a phone call. I let it go to voicemail. He said he wanted to talk, that there might be some misunderstanding, that he hoped we could work things out. He sounded like a man who had only just realized the ground had shifted under him. The family law process moved steadily. Brendan's lawyer pushed back on the access application, which surprised exactly no one. But Arthur's colleague in Barrie was thorough, and the court took a straightforward view. I was the child's maternal grandfather. I had a documented history of trying to maintain contact, and the denial of that contact had not been explained with anything convincing. Interim access was granted within 6 weeks, alternate Saturdays starting at 9 in the morning. The first Saturday I picked Lily up, she came to the door with a small backpack already on. Inside was a library book about wolves and a drawing she'd done of a horse, which she said was for me. I put it on the mantel, next to Claire's grad photo. As for the money, Arthur sent Brendan the letter documenting the $36,000 in transfers made over the course of 3 years, along with a formal request for an accounting of how those funds had been used on behalf of Lily. The letter noted that the transfers had been made with the explicit understanding they would be used for the child's expenses, and that evidence suggested this had not been the case. Brendan did not produce an accounting. His lawyer offered instead a vague settlement. He would not contest grandparent access in exchange for no further pursuit of the funds. Arthur presented me with that offer. I sat with it overnight. In the morning I called Arthur and told him I didn't want the money. I mean that. The money was already gone and I'd accepted that. What I wanted was stated clearly in writing that those funds had been received as support for Lily and used otherwise, not for a court fight, just on the record, something that couldn't be erased later. Arthur got that in writing. It took 2 more months and a mediator, but it's there, signed, dated. Brendan and I don't speak now. That's fine. What matters is that every other Saturday I drive down to Barry, or he drops Lily in Sudbury, and I get 8 hours with my granddaughter. We go to the science center in the city sometimes. Sometimes we just stay at my place and she reads on the couch while I putter around the house, and we have lunch together and she tells me things about school, about a girl in her class who is her best friend now, about wolves, always about wolves. She wants to be a wildlife biologist. I tell her that sounds exactly right for her. She asked me once, on the drive back to Barry, why I didn't come visit her for so long. I chose my words carefully. I thought I was helping in the right way, I told her, and then I realized I needed to help in a different way, a better way. She thought about that for a moment. Then she said, "The wolves in my book. The ones that watch from far away never catch anything. They have to actually come in." I didn't say anything for a moment. Then I said, "You're right about that, Lily." Claire would have liked that answer. She always did see things clearly, right to the end. I'm not the kind of man who asks for sympathy. I made choices that turned out to be wrong, and I made different choices to correct them. That's all this is, but I'll say this plainly because I think it's the thing that matters most. If someone you love leaves behind a child, don't send money and call it done. Go, show up. Sit in the Tim Hortons booth. Let the kid tell you about wolves. That's the only thing in the end that counts for anything. I think about the moment Lily ran across those wood chips and wrapped her arms around me, and I realized that everything that happened, the 3 years of transfers, the silence, the green Jeep in the driveway, the investigator's report, all of it was a consequence of choices. His choices, mine. And the thing about consequences is, they don't announce themselves ahead of time. They arrive quietly. The way that mistransfer arrived for Brendan on the 16th of the month. No warning. Just reality. I was not a perfect father-in-law. I kept my distance after Claire died because grief made me want to preserve what little remained, and I was afraid that if I pushed too hard, I'd lose access to Lily entirely. That caution cost me 14 months. I'll never get back. Looking honestly at yourself is uncomfortable, but I've found it's the only thing that actually moves you forward. I should have shown up sooner. I should have asked harder questions earlier. Sending money and calling it done was easier than driving 3 hours and sitting in someone else's awkward living room. I chose easy. That was my mistake and I own it. What turned things around wasn't anger, though the anger came. It was Vic asking one simple question on a Wednesday night. Do you actually know what that money's being used for? That question required me to think clearly instead of feel comfortably. There's a difference between the two that I'd stopped paying attention to. Grief can do that. It can make you accept the version of events that hurts least, and you start confusing that acceptance with wisdom. It isn't. Wisdom is asking the hard question anyway, even when you'd rather not know the answer. What Brendan did was straightforward in its wrongness. He took money given in trust and used it for himself, and he used a child, his own daughter, as the reason to keep receiving it. There's no complicated philosophy required to understand that. But here's what I've noticed in the years since. People who do that kind of thing are counting on your reluctance to look. They rely on your decency, your desire to avoid conflict, your fear of being wrong about someone you once trusted. The moment you actually look, clearly without flinching, the whole arrangement falls apart. He had no defense once I stopped looking away. The quality I'm most grateful I found in myself through all of this wasn't the anger or even the resolve to act. It was the willingness to keep going after being wrong for 3 years. That's harder than it sounds. When you've made a mistake that long, part of you wants to just absorb the loss quietly and move on. But Lily was at the end of that discomfort, so I kept going. I hired Carolyn. I called Arthur. I drove to the park. I showed up. That's the only thing that actually works. Not sending something from a safe distance, but physically, actually showing up. Lily told me once that wolves who watch from far away never catch anything. They have to come in. She was 8.5 and she understood something that took me 3 years to learn. I think about Claire when I look at Lily now. I think she would be relieved. Not because of anything I did cleverly, but because I finally stopped letting comfort make decisions for me. That's the whole of it.